Telecommunications meeting. I want to thank all of the committee members who are here and staff for helping us get rolling this morning. And thank all of you who are in the audience or listening at home. This meeting will be every Tuesday and Thursday at 9 a.m. We have 12 meetings before turnaround, so we have a ways to go. We will primarily spend the first part of our year focused on education, learning about the public utility system in Kansas, and everything from production to transmission to rate making and rate payment. I feel that it's vital that going forward, we have a group of legislators in this body that have more than a working knowledge of utilities and telecommunications in the state, and how these things work. So as a chairman, a couple of housekeeping measures. I tend to start on time and finish on time. So I try to respect your time. I know you have a lot to do in serving on your other committees and serving your constituents. So we will start and end on time to the extent that we can. I will ask presenters to truncate their presentations so that we can fit everything into the allotted time. If and when we get to working bills or resolutions in this committee, I tend to do that what's called Senate style. The one time you'll find me doing something from the Senate, that is, we don't require a motion to take up the bill. I'll ask you to grab the folder with that bill in it, tell you that we're going to be working that bill, and then I'll ask if there are any amendments, and we'll proceed to hear amendments and debate those amendments, and ultimately then a motion to pass out the bill would be in order at that time. So I tend to operate in a way that is as open and transparent as we can. I want everyone here to be able to speak the viewpoint that they have and what's going on with their district and what their thoughts are on measures that may come before us. You should feel free to do that. Feel free to question conferees at the appropriate time. I will say if you need to ask follow-ups, please ask the chair before asking follow-ups. And then if it's going to be more than 2 or 3 questions, I might suggest you take it offline and talk to the presenter outside the room so that other committee members can ask questions of conferees. So I think if we work together, we'll get through it just fine. It is a change. Change is inevitable. And that's what we're seeing now in the energy industry around the country, and that's what we're having happen here in Kansas too. And so it's going to be important that we get up to speed on all of these things as quickly as we can. To that point, I've met with Vice Chair Schreiber and Ranking Member Keither and our staff to talk about what our plan of attack should be for the first part of the session. Today, we're going to receive a presentation from the KCC on the fallout from Winter Storm Uri and some of the things that they are seeing. Thursday will be a chance for us to discuss committee rules and kind of do the more informal introductions that might go on. Folks from the industry are going to be welcome to introduce themselves and talk to us. I know that's normally a day one activity, but because the KCC was coming over to present to the Senate this week, I wanted to make sure we had them in here to give this presentation as well. Next week, we will begin a series of informational hearings on kind of the state of the utility industry in Kansas. We'll start with IOUs and co-ops and municipal utilities on Tuesday. We'll proceed to talk about the petroleum industry and natural gas on Thursday. And then we'll talk about telecom and cable the week after on Tuesday. So that gives you kind of the sketch out for where we're headed in the next few weeks. And then we'll have some time later in January to begin talking about resolutions or bills that may come before us. Senator Thompson and I met yesterday. I know he has an ambitious agenda for his committee. After turnaround, we'll see what the Senate has got to us. And if we have to take up their bills, we'll make sure we improve them as the House normally does. And you all will be my partners in crime in making sure that we make things as good as they can possibly be before they leave this committee and go to the House. So it is an honor to be working with you. Bear with me. It's been a minute since I've chaired a committee. But I will say I'm no stranger to utilities. I spent 6 years right over in that corner getting in trouble with the Secretary of State and learned a lot and really enjoyed this committee. It's a great committee. The folks that come to us from the industries are great people. They have a lot of knowledge, and I look forward to working with them and with you. With that, are there any questions for me before we begin the business end of our agenda? All right, seeing none. We'll proceed. Are there any bill introductions today? Seeing none from the committee. Any bill introductions from the gallery this morning? All right, this will be an easy year. Don't want to jinx it. Okay, with that, we're going to proceed to the item of business that we have on the agenda this morning, which is a presentation from the Kansas Corporation Commission from Justin Grady to talk to us a little bit about Winter Storm Uri from February of 2021 and the impact on the industry. With that, we'd welcome Justin Grady to the committee. Welcome, Mr. Grady.
Good morning, Chair Finch, members of the committee. My name is Justin Grady, and I'm the Chief of Revenue Requirements, Cost of Service, and Finance with the KCC. I appreciate the opportunity to appear before you this morning to talk about a topic that's as important as it is and that ultimately I'm certain has affected each and every one of you in this room. I know it's affected all of us and certainly affected every Kansan last February, and that's Winter Storm Uri. The information that I presented today, there's a lot of it, or that I've prepared. It usually runs around 45 minutes to an hour to run through it all, and that should leave us plenty of time for questions. Does that work with the chair? Okay, great. So with that, I'll proceed then. So the slide 2, the focus of my presentation today, first we're just going to do a recap of the winter event, and discuss what made it so severe and so historic. A lot of times when you talk about Winter Storm Uri, people say, "Well, it gets cold all the time in Kansas. What's the big deal?" But this truly was a historic winter event and a weather event. And we'll talk about just some of what made it so severe and so historic. And then we'll just move on to the impacts of what all that cold air and that winter weather actually meant in terms of impacts on supply and demand of both natural gas and electricity. And then some of what the fallout was from that, the result. Very high wholesale electricity and natural gas prices, and then ultimately culminating in shortages of both natural gas and electricity in Kansas. And then we'll review some of the industry reports and findings that have been identified thus far. I'll lean pretty heavily on the FERC-NERC joint inquiry that was just published last month in that regard. Also, the SPP Comprehensive Review Committee has presented their findings from the winter weather event and made their recommendations. And then also the independent market monitor at SPP has done a fair amount of work reviewing what they believe were the causes of the event. So I'll kind of summarize and go through those, and then we'll wrap up talking about the status of KCC proceedings, what we did in response to the event, and sort of where some of those proceedings stand today. A lot of those are still in progress and have hearings, even next week. And then we'll talk about lessons learned and some of the responses so far from the industry, from the KCC and others that, hopefully will either mitigate or, potentially eliminate the recurrence of events like this, both from the cost side and the reliability side. So you see we have a full agenda, but we've been living and breathing and sleeping this event since literally February 14th of last year. So have a lot to share this morning. Looking forward to it. So on slide 3, there's a lot of different maps that you can find on the internet or other sources that do a pretty good job of conveying, the severity of the cold weather that we experienced during the event. But this one is a NOAA map that shows the deviation from average maximum temperature for each day, or on this particular day, which was February 15th. And so you can see there that the high temperature stretching all the way down to the coast of, Galveston, Texas, was between 40 and 50 degrees below the maximum or the average high temperature for the day. So, this was a swath of cold air that was quite wide across the central part of the United States. and went clear down to the southern parts of Texas and was sustained in duration for, 6, 7, 8, 10, 12, 13 days, depending on, exactly where in the storm. So on slide 4 there, I pulled just a few of the, I guess the observations, the weather observations that were most interesting to me. We were below freezing for 13 straight days, below 32 degrees Fahrenheit in Kansas City. Oklahoma City and Dallas set their second coldest all-time weather records during the event, which are second only to the historic February 1899 weather event. There were over 3,000 daily cold temperatures set, 76 all-time cold temperatures regardless of the day during the winter. And this is an exact quote from, I've got the link there, and that you can go to the Weather Prediction Center. NOAA Weather Prediction Center has a very interesting weather webpage where they track every winter weather event, for a long time. And if you go review the Winter Storm Uri during this period of time, their quote was, "This cold outbreak is thought to be the most extreme for the southern Great Plains since February 12th, 1899. Wichita was for 10 days in a row below 20 degrees, which is the second coldest stretch of below 20 degrees for Wichita since that 1899 storm. So on slide 5, we begin to talk about some of what the impact was from a supply and a demand perspective. So first, with regard to electricity demand, natural gas provides the far majority of residential and home heating demand during the winter, but actually there is still a fair amount of electricity heating demand during the winter as well. And so when it gets that cold, you're going to see record demand for electricity. And so both SPP and ERCOT set their all-time winter peak demands during this event. SPP's was on February 15th. And I think it's notable to mention that those peak demands were set during a period of time in which there was widespread public calls for conservation, right? Every Kansas utility and every utility throughout SPP was requested beginning Sunday night by SPP to begin requesting public calls for conservation. And those calls for conservation were successful. There's a lot of ways you can measure that, but SPP does a remarkably good job, as do all electric utilities. They have to, right, of estimating precisely what their load is going to be. So SPP's short-term load forecast for that day was 47,000 megawatts, and yet the all-time winter peak was hit that day of 43,661. ERCOT also set their all-time peak demand on February 14th at almost 70,000 megawatts. They had much higher projected peaks the next day, and in SPP, we likely would have broken that peak as well on February 16th. But as we'll talk about, and the committee's probably aware, ultimately there were shortages in generation capacity and supply, and that demand couldn't be met. Ultimately, SPP ended up ordering firm load shed, the maximum of which was 2,718 megawatts. But it was much, much worse than that in ERCOT, with up to 20,000 megawatts of firm load shed for almost 3 consecutive days. So, and then I also hit on the record high natural gas demand, and you can see on slide 6, I've got a couple of graphic representations of just how high natural gas demand was during this period of time. The United States, demand for the entire United States did not actually beat its record high demand. We're 1.97% below the absolute maximum highest daily single demand for natural gas, but the United States did set a new 2-day demand for natural gas. And then, the chart that's sort of really sticks out to me is if you look at that one in the middle, the mid-con, that's just short for mid-continent region of the central part of the United States. You can see there that, January of 2021 was pretty normal weather, really. It was a lot warmer than that early, and it was pretty normal in January. And you can see what a cold snap like this will do to natural gas demand. I mean, it's off the charts and set a new record for both mid-continent region of the United States in total, as well as Texas. So on slide 7, we talk about the other effects of that extremely cold weather in that in the face of record demand for electricity and record demand for natural gas, we also unfortunately had record declines in the production and processing of natural gas during this period of time. So I list the sources there from where all of this information comes from. Total U.S. natural gas production during this period of time suffered the largest monthly decline on record at 28% of decline across the entire country from February 8th through the 17th. The production declines in Texas and the central and southern part of the United States were much worse than that. Texas's natural gas production during this period of time declined by 70%. If you look at Texas and Oklahoma and Louisiana combined, those 3 states represent 80% of the decline in natural gas production during this period of time. We also were able to nail down how the natural gas production declined in Kansas in response to this winter weather. And the KCC's Conservation Division compiles reports that they use for a variety of reasons, and that's where we got this information that if you look at the February 2021 natural gas production and compare it to January of 2021, it declined 21.42%, so pretty significant. And then that last bullet point there refers to testimony that was filed by Bernadette Johnson in the Kansas Gas Service company-specific general investigation, in which they evaluated the third-party commercial software database or commercial database software that they have access to, and their calculations were almost a 50% decline in natural gas production in Kansas during the peak of the declines. So the next couple slides 8 and 9, are just a graphical representation of what we've been talking about, slightly different views there. In slide 8, it's a national view that shows the impact of Texas and Oklahoma and Louisiana's production declines on the total. And then slide 9 is a different view. It's a graph that comes out of the FERC-NERC report, and this is focusing strictly on the event area, which is SPP, MISO South, and ERCOT. And so, right where the most intense shortages and scarcity was occurring for both gas and electricity, you can see there was precipitous declines in natural gas production and processing during this period of time. But fairly, I think another observation that you can gather from looking at these charts is how resilient of a resource it is once the weather warms and goes back to normal levels, right? I mean, there was a huge decline earlier in the month, and then by the end of the month, temperatures warmed and conditions got back to normal, and the natural gas supply was right back to where it was. Slide 10 is just the Kansas-specific view. I shamelessly stole this graphic from Ms. Johnson from the KGS investigation that I referred to. These are daily pipeline production receipts by the 3 major pipelines, or all the pipelines, but you can see the 3 major pipelines where that the decline in production receipts really truly affected our gas supplies during this period of time. And on slide 11, we start to get into, where the rubber meets the road in terms of you have record high demand in the face of record high or record low supply or record declines in natural gas supply. And on slide 11, what I've done there is pull a sampling of some of the extraordinary natural gas prices that were observed during this storm. And so these are prices that were reported by S&P Global Platts Gas Daily, which is by far and away the most widely used natural gas pricing index publication across the country. And these prices represent what was experienced during the 4-day weekend of the February 13th through the 16th. And so I say a 4-day weekend, that's a gas market, terminology or a vagary of the natural gas markets. So because that February 15th was President's Day, that's a federal holiday, and most organized financial exchanges were closed that day. And so when gas was purchased for for the weekend and that Monday, on Friday, February 12th, it was actually purchased for the 13th, 14th, 15th, and 16th. And of course, as that first weather graph showed, the coldest air, the most extreme time during the storm was February 15th. And so, when you think about the difficulty of trying to predict exactly how much natural gas or electricity or otherwise you're going to need to procure to serve your customers. And it's weather predictions are great, but we know 3-4 days out, there's not a high degree of accuracy. So anyway, it's a challenging situation, but in any case, you can see some of the prices there that were experienced. The Southern Star, it's maybe the fifth or sixth bullet point down. Southern Star's price at $329.60 an MMBTU. For context, the highest daily price ever recorded on that pipeline was $34 an MCF for an MMBTU for one day back earlier in, I believe, 2011 to the 2014 timeframe. But prices like these had never been experienced by the industry. They, I think most people would have laughed at you if you even suggested that prices like this were even possible in highly liquid, organized natural gas markets. But these prices were experienced all over the central part of the United States, as far south as Houston, as far north and east as the Chicago gas going into Chicago city gates. Southern California gas city gate gas prices were up at $144. And so you can see the average, the mid-continent regional average for the entire central part of the United States was $238 an MCF. So for context, the contracts that were set up in early February 2021 for first of the month price gas, which is another index that trades that basically says, I'll buy or sell you gas in an equal amount for the entirety of the month of February. Those volumes of gas traded for $2.54 per MMBTU. So, we're 100, 150 times normal prices. It's pretty unbelievable. On slide 12 is gas day 17, and it doesn't get any better. One more thing I want to mention on 11. So the other thing that was amazing is the national average price was so affected by this wide swath of extremely high gas prices that was a record for the national average price at $57.74, but it was broken the next day on February 17th. February 17th, it got worse. And as you look closely at the graphs from earlier in the presentation, you'll see that was the dearth of the absolute decline of production and processing of natural gas. Things did start to get better in the days after that. But so the Southern Star Central Gas Pipeline that's so important to Kansans gas, the midpoint price that was recorded for that day was $622.79 an MMBTU. So now we're up to 250 times, what would be considered a more average normal price. And you can see it wasn't, that when prices get that volatile, when the prices get that high, they get that volatile generally. And so that wasn't the only, there were prices in the $950 range. Houston gas was trading for $400. Southern California gas was still over $100. And there's the mid-continent regional average and the national average, again, were records for that day. And then I didn't have February 18th here, but, as bad as it was in Kansas, and it was bad in terms of pricing, wholesale natural gas pricing, the state of Oklahoma was hit so dramatically much worse than us, unfortunately. So, when I mentioned that our price was $322 an MCF for Southern Star, the One Oak, Oklahoma trading hub in Tulsa, which is a highly liquid, very major trading hub for that state, was even higher. And then on Wednesday, gas day 17, their price was $944 an MCF, an MMBTU. And then the next day, their price hit a new all-time record anywhere in the United States at $1,193 an MMBTU. So, and for context on gas day 18, things were starting to normalize in Kansas. It's unbelievable to use the word normal referring to $44 in MMBTU gas, but prices were back down to $44 on Southern Star for gas day 18. So that's the natural gas situation. The impact on wholesale electric supply, go into that on 13, starting on page 13. Record demand for electricity supply during this period of time, right? And for a variety of reasons, 33% of the nameplate capacity of generation was unavailable to provide service in SPP during this period of time. And in ERCOT, it was worse, that 38%, almost 39% of their generation capacity was derated at the worst of the event. And so, I'd say very similar to what happened in the wholesale natural gas market, record demand and significant cuts in supply. The predictable result was that we experienced new wholesale electricity market prices, new high record electricity market prices in the wholesale market for both the day ahead and the real-time market. Experienced prices over $4,000 a megawatt hour. And I have a bullet point calculation there that helps to put that into context for a regular residential customer using 1,000 on average, 1,000 kilowatt hours a month. That's $130 in wholesale electricity costs per day at those high prices. And so, those prices weren't $4,000 a megawatt hour the entire time, but the day ahead price is for that 24-hour period of time. That was the price for electricity. So it was extreme. And again, for context, the average day ahead price in the SPP integrated marketplace it's the lowest in the country out of all organized RTOs, and it was $17.69 per megawatt hour for 2020. So on slide 15 there, that's just a graphical representation of the information on the previous slide. So in addition to high wholesale prices, we also experienced natural gas and electric shortages in Kansas. There were curtailments of both natural gas and electricity. For the most part, natural gas curtailments were limited to customers that are on interruptible tariffs that receive a discounted service in order to have the potential to interrupt in the event of high system demand or stress on the system, or non-human needs customers that were transportation customers. So during this event, all customers were asked to conserve publicly, but especially industrial or non-human needs customers were asked to reduce their natural gas usage and to put their gas use on plant protection levels, or to change fuel supplies if possible. As a result of this, there are stories of businesses that experienced, property damage, frozen pipes, lost sales opportunities, diminished product quality. There were financial impacts that occurred to Kansas businesses as a result. The conservation efforts, though, generally were necessary, and ultimately, the ability of Kansans of all forms to respond to this conservation message during this event was a success story, in that human needs gas customers, 99.99% of all human needs gas customers kept their gas service during this event. And that's, that can't be overstated, right? The importance of that. There were a lot of people that died in ERCOT when they didn't have electricity to be able to provide that's required to run your natural gas furnace. And so people died from carbon monoxide poisoning or freezing to death. And so, it's not overstating it to say that natural gas continuity of natural gas service to human needs customers during this period of time, it's a life and death event. I just mentioned there are several instances of businesses that took actions that were detrimental to their own personal financial affairs that were very beneficial to the system as a whole. Right? So these businesses switched fuel sources or generated their own electricity or shut down their production lines, and so those stories are a real success as well. In one context. So with regard to electric shortages, I got the specifics on slide 17. SPP ordered firm load shed for the first time in its 80-year history. That affected Kansas customers twice. On February 15th, the first of the firm load shed was 1.5% of load for just under an hour. The second instance was a little longer, so around 3 hours and 21 minutes. And that was a larger amount of load shed as well, at 6.5% of load, or 2.7 gigawatts of firm load that was shed. And so the way that firm load shed occurred is it was distributed out pro rata to every utility across the 14-state region of SPP, according to a predefined ratio that was based on each utility's usage during the winter from the previous year. And again, for comparison, just because it's part of history and it's important to keep these things in context. The worst of the load shed that occurred in ERCOT was up to 20,000 megawatts, which is 45% of their load, and it was for 3 consecutive days. Slide 18 is just a graphical representation of exactly when the load shed occurred and how long it occurred for. All right, so slide 19, we start to talk about what were some of the causes of everything that we experienced. And so in this section of the presentation, we lean pretty heavily on the findings from the FERC-NERC report, but also, the SPP reports. I mean, at this point, we've reviewed nearly, if not every industry report that's been presented on the event. and also some of our own personal observations. But so beginning as early as February 7th, maybe even February 6th, natural gas production wells began to decline, began to shut in or freeze in. Some of these wells were just shut in preemptively in order to avoid, catastrophic damage to their equipment or environmental, oil spills or. But natural gas wells also lost power during the event, and we'll talk about, sort of when that occurred in later slides and what the magnitude of that was. But natural gas wells and production facilities and processing facilities also lost power, including as a result of firm load shed. There's a couple of specifics there. So by February 14th, so this is going to be before there was any firm load shed in SPP or ERCOT. Natural gas production had declined by 30% and processing by 50%. And then by the 17th, at its worst, we've seen these numbers before, 71% decline in production and 82% decline in processing. And so on slide 20, this is a graphic that comes out of the FERC-NERC inquiry. They did this analysis in such a granular fashion. They evaluated it on a day-by-day basis through the event. But this graphic summarizes it for the entire event. So from February 8th to the 20th, and you can see there the individual causes, what they attribute the causes of the decline in production. But overall, their assessment was that freezing issues and just extreme cold weather was responsible for 58% of the decline, with power loss responsible for 23.5%. And they point out that they weren't able to identify or segregate the power loss category between just regular weather-related power outages that can occur during an extreme winter weather event versus the firm load shed that occurred. And their point is these events were occurring, simultaneous and coincident with one another, and so they didn't attempt to nail it down like that. Then on slide 21 is just during the worst of the production declines. As I mentioned, this is actually daily. They have these charts in the FERC-NERC report, but this one shows the peak of the decline in production. And you can see, the different causes that are attributed to that, from voluntary shut-in to lost power, or, the midstream processor was down that they would have otherwise given their production to. Slide 22 is much the same data, but it's gas processing instead. And again, there's day-by-day detailed analysis in the report, but they attribute reduced gas receipts into the processing as responsible for 61% of the issues, frozen winter weather issues 13%, and loss of power at 18%. And then I went ahead and pulled a specific quote from the report. It really spoke to me, and that's just that I'm going to read it. The majority of natural gas production supply declines in Oklahoma, northern and western Texas occurred before February 15th, the first day on which firm load shed occurred, while the majority of the production declines in central, eastern, and southern Texas and Louisiana occurred on and after February 15th. And that's critical because, in my mind, a lot of their findings were event area wide as opposed to SPP or ERCOT. But when you read that quote, it's obvious that the decline of power affecting natural gas production was much more attributed to ERCOT area than SPP, right? And so on slide 23, there's another way to look at that. They actually examine production and processing declines by production basin. And there is a map in the report that shows where these production basins are. But basically, Anadarko Basin is almost entirely within SPP, if not entirely. And the Permian Supply Basin is just barely within SPP. But if you look at, what they attribute the cause of these production and processing declines to by production basin, you can see that, they only attribute 6% of the declines in the Anadarko Basin to loss of power supply, and in the Permian Basin, 25%. So, but there are other basins further down that column that they attribute 75% of the loss of gas production to power supply. So, you know, it did occur, though. There were instances in which power loss affected natural gas production in SPP, and so that doesn't mean it's not meant to diminish the importance of it as an issue, but it was a much larger issue in ERCOT than it was in SPP. Slides 24 and 25 sort of talk about what did not fail or what went correctly during this event. You know, gas pipeline operations, for the most part, performed as they were designed and built to perform. The FERC-NERC report, you know, points out that pipelines were very minimally affected by electricity outages because they have either natural gas-fired compressors or backup power supply. But with that being said, capacity was certainly constrained during this event, right? You talk to any of the big interstate gas pipelines providing service in this central part of the country, Southern Star Central beat several of its daily throughput records during this period of time. So they were moving a lot of gas, but there was not enough molecules of gas or capacity to transport enough gas for everybody and everything. And so non-human needs gas service was restricted at times. And so as a result, I have this statistic here that was actually presented differently than this in the FERC-NERC report. And the FERC-NERC report, they said 53% of generating plants that had firm service had more than 100% of their gas shipped during the event. And so, but I'm thinking, wait a second. I mean, that means almost half of the electric generating units that had firm transportation during this event did not get 100% of their gas shipped, right? So it's, I mean, I guess if when we're all looking at solutions going forward, firm transportation service on an interstate gas pipeline does not guarantee an electric generating unit is going to have access to natural gas, because when during demand events like this, it's much, much more important to keep gas service to human needs customers as opposed to industrial purposes, you know, of which the production of electricity is one. Slide 25 just talks about storage. Natural gas storage was obviously invaluable during the event, provided an incredible financial benefit to companies that had it. The ability to pull your own gas out of storage instead of buy it at market prices was critical, and storage largely performed the way it was supposed to. And several records were set during this event in terms of the amount of gas that came out of storage. You know, without that natural gas in storage, there's no way to meet the level of demand for natural gas during this event with the production declines that we experienced. All right, slide 26, we start to talk about the electricity shortages and some of the causes and different fuel types that were out during this event. So this first slide comes from, it's a pretty summary level slide from the FERC-NERC report. And all it does really is segregate by cost or by cause the loss of electric generating units. And so, you know, it's interesting because fuel supply issues got a lot of press and a lot of attention during this event. But I was struck by this particular graph in that, you know, still freezing issues and mechanical and electrical issues, which exhibited a positive correlation to cold weather during the event, we're still responsible for 2/3 of the electric generating outages that occurred. But fuel issues were important across the entire region. FERC attributes them as the second leading cause of natural gas shortages, or NERC, the NERC FERC report. So slide 27 is There's a little bit of a different view, and this is by fuel type. And what it shows is basically every megawatt of capacity that was outaged or not available, either derated or outaged during this entire time frame is shown here. So, you know, if you had a 100 megawatt gas unit that was out for 6 days, then it shows up as 600 megawatts of gas, right? So you can see that, you know, natural gas fired units were 56% of the outaged megawatts that were not available, followed by 23% wind and 18% coal. One thing that's interesting about this chart, though, is that, again, this is event area wide, SPP, MISO, and ERCOT. And so the causes of those natural gas unit being out differed greatly between SPP and ERCOT. So SPP actually had much more fuel supply issues for their natural gas units than freezing issues. And so the numbers are 458 incidences of fuel supply outages versus 86 associated with freezing issues for natural gas units. That's almost 80%. But in ERCOT, though, there's a graphic in the FERC-NERC report that's fascinating because it shows fuel supply outages for natural gas units, and it peaks at 7,700 megawatts. It's like 7,700 megawatts. They had almost 30,000 megawatts out due to freezing issues. All right, so it was the lack of winterization on plants in ERCOT was a much, much bigger issue than fuel supply, which I thought was interesting. Slide 28 and 29 are kind of a different view of somewhat of the same information. Slide 28 shows generating outages during the entirety of the event by fuel type. And again, remember, this is SPP, MISO, and ERCOT. And so, you know, especially if you compare slide 28 and 29, you can see an enormous jump in gas generation unit outages around midnight of very early morning hours of February 15th. And those, you can look on slide 29, you can see those were not SPP units, right? So it's almost 25,000 megawatts of natural gas units that went off in a very short period of time in ERCOT during this period of time. And because their fuel supply issues were 7,700 megawatts total, it cannot be due to that. So it was, the vast majority of that was freezing, mechanical, electrical issues, you know, et cetera. Slide 30 is a geographic aerial representation of where these electric generating units failed. The FERC-NERC report, if you've looked at it, you know, a lot of those graphics cut off just below Kansas. And so we reached out to the lead authors of that report, and they were kind enough to provide us with the graphic that shows Kansas as well. And this graphic shows the different fuel types that were unavailable. So slide 31 is just sort of some of the conclusions that come out of the SPP and FERC-NERC reports. We talked about fuel supply issues, and SPP, 47% of their outages were linked to natural gas fuel supply issues. But still, that's a big number, and it's the single largest cause, but it's less than half of the issues that they faced. So that means the others are, you know, either freezing issues, you know, and there's several different causes we can talk about, but so out of 30,500 megawatts of outaged capacity on February 16th, when things were the shortest, 18,000 megawatts of that was natural gas fired generation, and 72% of that cited fuel supply as the reason for the outage. Freezing was a major issue in SPP. We had 12,500 units out at one time, or 12,500 megawatts of units out. And you know, the causes of that freezing differ by day through the event. Wind turbines experienced significant icing and blade icing issues, and earlier on in the event, and then for a while that got better. But a lot of wind turbines in SPP have minimum temperature, minimum ambient temperature cutoffs. So when it gets below -4 or -13 degrees, those wind turbines shut down in order to prevent catastrophic damage to the unit. That's the way they're designed. So, freezing, but there were freezing issues on coal plants and natural gas fire generating units. We experienced it in Kansas. There were frozen coal issues that the utilities fought through, frozen delivered coal that was coming, that already totally frozen in the trains. Just a wide variety of mechanical, electrical issues associated with extremely cold weather. All right, slides 32 and 33 are just sort of graphical representations of what we've already talked about. On 32, this shows generating outages by fuel type. And so I'll just point you to the green section of that first, which is wind. And we talked about, early on with that blade icing issue, wind froze off in large quantities, up to 10,000 megawatts of wind on outage. And was the largest cause of outages for almost a week. But that actually improved some as we got into the coldest air and the most critical times. But you can see that, natural gas generating outages, again, mostly by fuel supply issues, that available natural gas just got more and more and more scarce during the event, right? In the company-specific general investigations that we're involved in at the KCC, we've encountered instances in which electric utilities could not buy gas at any price on February 17th. I mean, it's one thing to have really high natural gas prices at $1,000 an MMBTU, but they couldn't buy gas at any price. So there just were not enough molecules to provide the demand that was being demanded of that commodity during that period of time. So slide 33 is a little bit of a different view, and that's just by cause code. And the orange in the middle is fuel supply. The yellow and the blue, you can basically consider those to be freezing issues. Either icing on wind turbine blades or frozen condensate lines or binding valves on natural gas units. But there isn't a freezing category, but that's pretty much what those represent. All right, slide 34. This is just a reminder of, in SPP, sort of what units do we rely on for capacity, what kind of units provide energy generally in SPP. And so if you start off on the left, you'll see that nameplate capacity, there's almost 95,000 megawatts of generating capacity in the 14-state region of SPP. And 27,000 megawatts of that is wind. But so, almost 30% of our nameplate capacity is wind. But when you get to accredited winter capacity in the middle, wind only makes up 6% of the accredited winter capacity, right? So, the generation planners and resource adequacy planners in SPP realize that you can't dispatch these units. You can't make the wind blow. You can turn them off, but you can't turn them on. And so they don't count on them to provide very much capacity. What they count on to provide capacity in the winter is coal and natural gas. And I mean, that's represented by the blue and the orange rings in this donut ring chart, right? It's 83% of our capacity that we rely on to keep the lights on in the winter is coal and natural gas. And then on the far right-hand side, you see that, wind actually provides more energy than any other generation source in SPP over the year. And so, this event, I think, sort of provided a reminder, to a lot of people that there are generating resources that have a lot of value producing energy over the course of the year. There's no fuel costs and it's very cheap to produce energy. But there are other types of units that are in SPP that are very valuable from a capacity perspective or an extreme winter weather perspective. And that's just, hopefully that's represented here. All right, so the next three slides are just what kind of, how did wind and coal and natural gas, how did they perform during the event? And these are all out of the SPP board report. What hour by hour, what was their availability? How did they perform? So you can look at the data there, but about 12 to 16% of the wind that's available in SPP, or that's in SPP, was available during the most critical times. And that was between 80 and 100% of what people expected to be available. So, we don't, it didn't help a lot, but we don't expect a lot out of it in the winter. The next slide, 36, is coal. Around 80% of the coal was available during the most extreme times, and that's around 90% of the accredited capacity. Its accredited capacity. And for natural gas units, between 34 and 37% of gas was available during the most extreme times, which is 40 to 45% of its accredited capacity. And so, this is the reason that natural gas fuel supply issues were focused on so heavily in the SPP report. It's the fact that, that's, if you just look at compared to accredited capacity, that's the largest deviation compared to accredited capacity. And so that's what those planners were counting on being available, and ultimately only around half of it was available when we needed it the most. But the next couple slides are a little bit of a different view, 36 and 37. And this is the big picture, okay, so we talked about what units weren't available and what was on outage, but what about what energy was used during the event, right? And so, coal and gas-fired electric generation provided 70% of the power that was needed to keep the lights on during this event, ultimately. And the numbers are there. You can see imports from other regions were vitally important to SPP. It's one of the things that truly separated us from ERCOT, to be honest. We were able to bring in up to 10% of our energy needs during this period of time. And even more than the wind units in SPP were providing. And then on page 39, or slide 39, you can see this is Evergy's energy production. We pulled this data together in our company-specific docket for Evergy, and this is their hourly energy production by fuel type during this time. And Evergy has more coal and less gas than SPP as a whole. So you can see, between coal and nuclear, provided almost 80% of the power that was being used to keep the lights on during this event. Wind at 7.2% and gas at 7.11%. All right, slides 40 and 41, you take a look at those. They just show the value of imports during the event and how critical it was when we were importing up to 5,000 megawatts of power at certain times, right? Just think about it, 2 Jeffrey Energy Center units worth of power coming in from MISO. And when at a certain point they experienced their own transmission system limitations, they experienced their own production and supply imbalances, and they just couldn't allow us to continue to import that power. When they started cutting that power is when SPP ordered firm load shedding. And when those imports were able to resume, SPP was able to restore their load. And so you can see it clearly in the graphs presented on 40 and 41. All right. Slide 42 is just an overview of the KCC proceedings and what we had going on. And there's some specific details about, how the commission responded to these events. And but just, from an overview is over that weekend, that extreme cold weekend when the event was at its worst and natural gas prices were 250 times their highest, their normal. We became aware that there wwere credit issues developing. There were literally utilities that potentially couldn't buy their gas supply for Tuesday or Wednesday, and it was an emergency situation for sure. So So we worked over that weekend and issued an emergency order pretty early on Tuesday, February 15th. And the real purpose of that order was just to say, look, we know that natural gas and electricity is at unbelievably high levels, but we want you to do everything that it takes to keep the light and the power on. And whatever the financial consequences of that is, we'll work that out later. But right now, the most important thing is for reliability, And so I don't know that, there maybe are people that would criticize that decision, but, it was a life or death situation. And so we just wanted to make sure everybody knew where we stood, which was reliability over financial ramifications. But so we also opened up individual company-specific dockets for each of the major utilities in the state. And, sort of refer to some of what we're looking at on slide 43 there. I mean, we're evaluating how prepared were they? How did they respond during the event? Were their decisions reasonable with regard to the costs that they decided to incur? And maybe most importantly, what have we learned from this, and what can we do to improve or get better or mitigate the recurrence of this event? So on slide 44, that's just a rundown of the plans that were filed by the regulated utilities in the state, and what the fallout was, or the financial ramifications we were talking about. And another requirement that we had of these utilities was, defer these costs, put them in a special regulatory account, and come forward with a plan to keep this affordable for customers and spread out the impact over time. And you can see some of those numbers are based on what was filed, and some of those numbers are based on what we've agreed to in a settlement at this point, but hasn't been approved by the commission yet. And I can answer any questions that the committee has about any of those. Interestingly enough, Evergy Kansas Metro, which is the old KCPL system, actually recorded a significant benefit during this event. They have a larger percentage of their generation capacity that's represented by coal and nuclear versus natural gas compared to other utilities. And those units were able to produce power at a cost of $20 a megawatt hour and sell it to people all over the footprint in SPP for $4,000 a megawatt hour. And so ultimately they have a benefit for their customers that they've requested to spread over 1 year. We're going to file a report and recommendation this week that recommends spreading that out over 2 years, equivalent to the detrimental impact that they're requesting to spread out for Evergy Kansas Central customers, for customer side equity in that regard. And it's just for context, two of the smallest regulated utilities at the KCC, American Energy's gas service and the city of Eskridge, which we regulate because of the number of customers that they have outside of 3 miles from the city limits, incurred over $1,000 of natural gas costs per customer during this event. Okay, so a theme that you'll see through the remaining few slides here is that size and financial stability matter. There were strategies that you could put in place to mitigate the exposure to these wholesale natural gas prices, but they're complicated and sometimes they're expensive. And basically, the more exposed to one individual area of supply or one interstate gas pipeline or the daily physical gas market, then the worse the response was, or the financial consequences were. On slide 45 there, that's just there's a little bit there in terms of the status of each one of those proceedings and where they stand. We still have hearings going on some of these, and one of the consequences of our decision to set up individual company-specific dockets is there's only so many of me. There's only so many of the people that report to me, and so some of these had to be staggered, and we're still working through them. Slide 46 is just some detail and some specificity around a proceeding that that got some attention, media coverage and whatnot, and it pertains to it pertains to KGS's filing related to the penalty provisions of its tariff for its transportation customers. And so there were transportation customers and marketers that did not deliver all the natural gas that they were required to during this event. And basically, KGS filed a waiver to say we don't want to bill them the multipliers. We only want to bill them the assumed cost of gas that we had to provide on their behalf. And so the specifics of what I put on this slide is probably the most I'll go into because we actually have hearings on this next week. But ultimately, we were involved in settlement technical discussions, and where this stands today is that KGS is seeking to recover basically only the cost of gas that it extended on behalf of those customers. And we also worked out a reimbursement mechanism that allows for customers or marketers that were actually long to the system and provided a benefit during the event to be compensated. And so that's $23 million worth of compensation that otherwise wouldn't exist in KGS's tariff. And so anyway, that settlement, all parties to that settlement have supported it except for one. And so we're having a hearing next week, January 19th and 20th, to talk about that. Slide 47, we've talked about some of this, but I have the overall cost of gas per MMBTU there for the utilities that we've discussed so far. And this is where you can see, like I said, size and financial stability and access to sophisticated technologies or strategies. It really can make a big difference. In general, the more storage and baseload first of the month price gas you had, the better you were. But what we've found is that those options, those contracting strategies, those options don't exist uniformly. Access to those is not uniform necessarily throughout Kansas utilities. There are, and the other thing is those strategies and contracts can be expensive. So, risk cannot be eliminated. It can be shifted to somebody else in the financial markets, and they require compensation for that. And so, there's instances in which utilities were able to use options in their contracts to lower their costs during this event that other utilities didn't have. And when you look into why did the other utilities not have it, well, when they did their RFPs for gas supply, nobody responded, but they did respond to another utility. And so it's ultimately a deregulated, market regulated product basically. And so that's basically your financial fortunes with regard to your exposure to natural gas during this event were mostly related to your exposure to the daily physical gas market. So I did mention there that, all three of the big utilities, big three gas utilities, KGS, Atmos, and Black Hills, made changes over the summer and leading into the winter in order to prevent or mitigate a recurrence of a wholesale spike in natural gas prices if, God forbid, something like that were to occur again. But something that we're all going to have to spend more time talking about and thinking about is that those changes are not cheap and they're not free. So what the gas utilities did was within the bounds of previously commission-approved budgets, they've done everything they can for this upcoming winter. If something like that were to occur again in February or later this month, that they will fare substantially better. But if we're going to go beyond that to try to get a significant degree of comfort that if there was another Winter Storm Uri, customer bills would only go up by 10 or 15%, then that's a different conversation. It's going to be a lot more expensive. You're going to pay a lot more every day in order to avoid the recurrence of an event that nobody can predict when that's going to occur again. So a lot of big discussions going on in that regard, and there certainly probably won't be any easy answers. So slide 48 is just shows you that for Black Hills and Atmos and KGS, those three big utilities, they weren't overly exposed to any one segment of the market necessarily. They were pulling out of storage. They were buying gas at stable baseload prices. They were buying gas on the financial markets, and it's roughly that 30 to 40% of the gas that they bought from the daily physical gas market is what caused the financial ramifications that they had. Slide 49 is just lessons learned from an SPP perspective on the electric side. SPP made 22 recommendations. Their tier 1 recommendations are listed there. They primarily relate to fuel assurance and changes in their resource planning strategies. They're evaluating seasonal resource adequacy assessments and minimum reliability attributes. And, I think everything's on the table right now within SPP. They have formed a task force called an Improved Resource Availability Task Force, which is to implement these recommendations. And Kansas is represented well on that task force. We have our former Commissioner Sherry Feist Albrecht is a consultant for our SPP work group right now, and she represents us very well in that task force. And we also have Sunflower Electric and Evergy have a member on the task force. SPP has made a few changes going into this winter. They're not allowing as many planned outages. They've really made some significant improvement to their forecasting methodologies, and they're evaluating much more extreme weather assessments when they do their reliability assessment. 51 it provides the FERC NERC report on the winter weather event and their 28 recommendations. Probably most critical here is NERC is recommending, as a result of this event, requirements to have winter weather, to protect winter weather, to have electric generating units that have critical pieces on electric generating units to be protected from cold weather for basically winterization standards. That might be a surprise to a lot of people that wasn't already a requirement, but it wasn't. There was a requirement to have a winter plan and to prepare, but these are actually engineering technical specifications and requirements unit by unit, state by state, for basically for the generating units to be allowed to continue to provide service during extremely cold weather. They've also recommended that Congress and state legislatures and regulatory agencies require natural gas facilities to implement cold weather preparation plans. And then they recommended that critical natural gas infrastructure should be protected from manual and automatic load shedding, and also that critical natural gas infrastructure should be protected from being offered into demand response programs. And then last two slides here on slide 52. This is just I mentioned this week we're going to file our report on the Evergy results of the Evergy company specific review. And we've made, this is just the first step, I would say, in this process. We're making a recommendation that Evergy formally evaluate everything that I've listed on that slide. And maybe, there's another, maybe half a dozen as well that I didn't list. And now the process starts where we need to talk with Evergy and the other parties to the proceeding and say what's economically feasible and what's feasible from an engineering perspective I would say everything's on the table. We want to evaluate the potential for retrofit to existing wind farms to make it, to increase the minimum temperature that they can operate in. We want to evaluate on-site natural gas storage from liquefied natural gas facilities. We don't think that's gotten enough discussion. We think when we want to talk about conversion of natural gas units to dual fuel capability with fuel oil, and to have 3 to 7 days of fuel oil on site. So you know, some of these decisions will necessarily occur at SPP, but some of these decisions need to occur within the KCC and within the legislature, because while the SPP has authority over, you know, minimum reliability requirements, minimum resource adequacy levels, and they can set up certain rules regarding how much generation capacity you have to have available at any one time. But the financial ramifications of the way that these utilities interact with SPP is a Kansas decision, right? So one of our key recommendations is that, you know, Evergy should not have any of its baseload generating units on a planned outage during December, January, or February, right? So our view is that we ought to be able to have enough time during shoulder months of the season to be able to provide those outages. And of course, that review is with the aid of hindsight, which is 2020, because if you look at the financial ramifications for scheduling your baseload generating units as to be on outage for February of the last 10 years, you probably would have made money by buying market power instead of from your coal-fired generating units. But you know, this event has shaken everybody's understanding of risk, and it's caused a reevaluation of everything. And so you know, we hope we're looking into it and addressing it as comprehensively as we can. Okay, last slide. Thankfully for you all and me, slide 53 is sort of, okay, well, where do we stand for this upcoming winter then, right? So NERC and FERC put out an annual winter reliability assessment. And as you can imagine, this whole process was greatly revamped and significantly changed as a result of last year with Winter Storm Uri. And so they improved their forecasting methodologies. They evaluated much more extreme weather scenarios. And one of the scenarios that they evaluated is essentially a repeat of Winter Storm Uri. And so if you look at the three black black shaded RTO regions, SPP, MISO, and ERCOT are the ones that they evaluated for a repeat of Winter Storm Uri. And what they found is that, you know, MISO and ERCOT would have firm load shed events with a repeat of Uri, but SPP would not. But it would be tight, right? 0.8% reserve margins, and so they still predict that we would be required to import 2,000 megawatts of power from our neighbor MISO, which is about half of what we imported net during the last event. So slight improvements. I mean, there have been changes that have been made, and I think it shows in that reliability assessment, but it's still tight, and it definitely goes to show that there's a lot of work left to do in SPP and other regions as well. So first of all, I apologize. That took a lot longer than I thought it would. I've done my best to try to, you know, to shorten it, and to, it was difficult to limit it to actually what I put in the slide. So I'm sorry, but I'll certainly stand ready and willing to answer any questions that the committee might have. Thank you.
Mr. Grady, thank you for your time in preparing this report and presenting it to us today. Questions from the committee for Mr. Grady? Representative Delperdang.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here. Very, very good report. I started out with several questions, but as it went on, you answered more and more of them. But you touched on the coal, gas, nuclear, solar, wind that was all available and spending at the time. But slide 31, you actually got into the outage issues and the causes of it, which which made me kind of think, if you want to jump over to the slides 36 and or 38, it talked about the big picture of what energy was being used and what was available during the outages. What would that slide look like had we gone through this again and we had more and more of these coal plants shut down permanently? As we're trying to, seems like we're phasing coal out. The second question is, what would that, if the lack of coal, if we shut more of these down, what is that going to do to the natural gas spike and possible prices associated with it then?
Well, yeah, that's a really good question, Representative. So there's no question in my mind anyway, and this is you get 1,000 different opinions if you ask 1,000 different people, but so from my perspective, there's absolutely no way that today, at this moment, with the technology that we have, that we could operate reliably during a winter storm event like we experienced without those dispatchable, thermal dispatchable generating units with fuel on site, right? It's not possible. I mean, the amount of energy that you would have to provide from something else to replace that coal would be, battery technology. I mean, it exists and it's getting better, and they're doing big pilot projects and they're building them bigger and cheaper. And I think, hopefully they've gotten the fire issues associated with the spontaneous combustion, but it's a lot of megawatts, right? And so, and they provided, they had outages and they had issues, but they provided a lot of reliable energy during this event. So, I don't know, it's a wake-up call, certainly. Everybody, we need to be careful. I mean, a lot of people think that the transition needs to occur at some point. I think it's a question of how quickly does it occur and what kind of technology is there to come up behind and replace those dispatchable units. And I don't know if that's hydrogen or some of the other non-carbon intensive fuel sources that can provide dispatchable energy, but something has got to be dispatchable with fuel available when you need it, or it would have been, dramatically worse.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you diving into that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative O'Hobbison.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your presentation. I got two questions per se.
We'll see how you do on the first one.
My question is, in regards to that weekend, with all the gas prices, was there any oversight in regards to those people who actually use propane? Was there any relation in terms of spike in prices in propane that weekend as well? Or businesses and homes? I mean, with all the shortages you're talking about, was there anybody looking to, like, if there was any spike in regards to prices of propane, people who use propane prices, well, not that?
That's a good question as well, Representative. I don't know. I don't have any personal knowledge of that. I heat my home with propane. If I have to, I try to use wood heat as much as I can, but I don't know during the event. I mean, I'm just trying to, scan my mind and remember everything I've read. I've never.
Did any company take any advantage of, with respect to the price gouging, price hikes in regards to the propane industry, like try to take advantage?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I just don't know. We try to, I'd say we monitor the propane market just from an information perspective, and because we know it affects, Kansans, and there is a relationship between propane and natural gas and oil. But propane purchasing, distribution, it's completely deregulated in the state of Kansas. It's not under the KCC's purview, so.
Right.
I think that's why I don't have a more specific answer to your question.
Okay. My second question then is, we do know that natural gas was actually stored about $3 per the MMBTU, is that right? But it was actually delivered between $300 to $1,100. My question is, did anybody profit from this price? Did anybody profit per se in regards to this discrepancy?
Yeah, absolutely. So Kansas gas utilities and electric utilities didn't profit per se from the sale of this natural gas, right? So whatever financial ramifications existed from these utilities purchasing extremely high natural gas or electricity, those, those costs were passed on to their customers. So in other words, if KGS pulled a third of the gas that they provided to customers during the event out of storage for $2 or $3, then that's what that gas was sold to their customers for. But there certainly was profit that was made by several entities during the event. There would have had to have been, obviously, right? So, the suppliers of that natural gas is a publicly available list. I mean, there are lists of who sold KGS their gas during this period of time. Tenaska, British Petroleum, McGuire, there's Southwest Energy, Symmetry is a big marketer in the state of Kansas. I mean, there's a list of entities that profited during this event. And some of them are publicly traded, and as a result, you saw it right away as soon as their quarterly financial results were reported. But so some of those entities, already had fixed contracts to buy production at a certain rate, and then they had a contract to sell that natural gas at a market rate, usually set by the index. And so, yeah, there certainly were entities that profited.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Gardner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Justin, thanks for presenting this. Just, can I ask you on page 22, slide 44, on the winter storm proceedings down right above Eskridge, who is that company? Or am I missing something? Or
I'm sorry, did you say slide 44?
44.
Okay, I'm sorry.
44. That's the city of Eskridge also?
Okay, so it says City of Eskridge, KMEA supplied. The City of Eskridge is a member of Kansas Municipal Energy Agency,
Okay.
and that's who they got their gas from during the event. And when I said the statistics, the costs that they incurred, that includes Harveyville, because the City of Eskridge is a supplier for Harveyville as well.
So the one above that is the city of Eskridge with 186 customers.
Oh, I'm sorry. The one above that, I left out the
right.
company there. Yeah, that was a mistake. I'm sorry about that. That was American Energy's gas service. So American Energy's gas service has 186 customers. They are a small gas utility in Mack County, and they serve their customers primarily with local production basically they're on a gathering system. So, the history of that utility goes back a long time, but that's basically, they get unprocessed gas on the way to a gas processing facility. And during this event, their local gas production from local Kansas gas wells declined due to the cold weather, and declined to the point that they had to buy market price gas to serve their customers. And they actually bought that gas at the same price that KMEA paid for it. There was no profit there. They were just helping them out. It was an emergency operating agreement. But because they were exposed to one pipeline and market price gas, they were one of the most severely impacted companies in the state.
Well, thanks for that, Mr. Chairman. Just to follow up, if I could, I'm really concerned when I look at Eskridge, city of Eskridge. that's a regulated utility, correct, by you? And I assume it's regulated locally by the city council? Are they prepared? Are they, I guess I question their ability to go forward in an event like this and be prepared.
Right.
I guess that's my question.
Yeah, so quickly, they're a member of Kansas Municipal Energy Agency or Kansas Municipal Gas Association. I haven't spoken with KMGA or KMEA recently. They did come and give a presentation to the KCC regarding, their perspective of the winter weather events and how they were affected. I would be surprised if they haven't made changes, maybe even major or significant changes, because this event caught them, by surprise like everybody else. But I haven't personally spoken with them. But I would bet that they'd be willing to come and give you an update about what they've done.
Last question, Vice Chair Schreiber.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Justin. My question is about one of the KCC's recommendations on not having, or asking the utilities not to have any planned outages December, January, February. In the FERC report, there were 6,200 megawatts of planned outages before the freeze came in. Do you know kind of a round number of megawatts that is typically on a planned outage in Kansas, December through February?
Unfortunately, I don't.
Okay.
Nope.
I was just curious if there was a value there. Thank you.
It's something I think we can find out. And, I know that those planned outages have to be approved by SPP. And so, this recommendation, I don't know, we'll see, I guess, what Evergy's response is to this. And, there's a reliability concern, and then there's also the financial ramifications associated with having those big coal-fired units offline during the winter, so.
Justin, if our committee members have additional questions for you, is it okay to reach out to you via email?
Absolutely.
All right, committee members, I'll recommend that to you. We're at the end of our time today. I want to thank you again, Justin, for coming over and visiting with us,
Thank you. Sure.
and appreciate your time and the work that you and the rest of the KCC have put in on this.
Thank you.
So, members of the committee, anything else for the good of the order? Seeing nothing, I'll declare this meeting adjourned. We'll see you Thursday.